When my parents tragically died in a car crash, my world crumbled. I was just 24, fresh out of college, with no siblings or extended family to lean on. The grief was overwhelming, and it felt like the very ground beneath me had vanished. My parents had always been my anchor, and their sudden absence left me adrift in an uncharted sea. In the midst of this storm, I clung to one thing: my husband, Ravi. We'd been married for only a year, but his warmth had been my refuge during my parents' illness. He promised to support me through it all, to be my family when I felt I had none. I believed him. But I would soon discover that promises were nothing more than hollow words. Not long after my parents' funeral, cracks began to appear in our marriage. At first, they were small: Ravi working late, coming home distant and irritable. He said it was just stress from work, but something felt off. Then his family started visiting more often, and their presence came with a wave of judgment. "You're taking too long with the chores," his mother scolded as she scrutinized the kitchen. "And these dishes are still damp. You were spoiled in your parents' house, weren't you?" Ravi said nothing. He sat silently in the living room while his mother's harsh words pierced through me. I tried to dismiss it as a cultural difference at first. Ravi's family had traditional values, and I thought they were just adjusting to having a modern daughter-in-law. But as the weeks turned into months, their visits turned into extended stays, and their criticisms turned into demands. Then came the bombshell. One evening, Ravi returned home late, his face unreadable. "We need to talk," he said, avoiding my gaze. My heart sank. "What is it?" I asked. He hesitated, then blurted out, "I think we should take a break. I need some time to figure things out." It felt like a stab to the heart. "A break?" I asked, my voice shaky. "We're married, Ravi. What does that even mean?" He didn't respond. Instead, he packed a bag and left that night, leaving me alone in our home. The next morning, his family arrived, with their luggage. "We're moving in," his mother declared as if she had every right to. "Ravi told us everything. We'll help you adjust while he sorts himself out." Adjust? Adjust to what? My husband abandoning me? But I didn't argue. I was too emotionally exhausted, too lost in my grief to fight back. It didn't take long for their true intentions to become clear. Ravi's parents treated me like their personal servant. I cooked, cleaned, and catered to their every need, all while they criticized everything I did. "You call this tea?" his father sneered one morning, pushing the cup away. "Even a child could do better." At first, I tried to please them, hoping kindness would soften their attitudes, but their demands only grew. Soon, I was waking at dawn to prepare breakfast, spending the day cleaning, and staying up late ironing their clothes. I felt like a shadow of my former self, a servant in my own home. With no one to confide in, my friends drifted away as I withdrew into isolation, too embarrassed to share what was happening. And Ravi? He stopped responding to my calls altogether. One day, as I scrubbed the kitchen floor, Ravi's mother loomed over me with a smug smile. "You should be grateful we're here," she said. "Without us, you'd have nothing." Her words lingered in my mind long after she walked away. Nothing, was that how she saw me? Still, I held on to the hope that Ravi would return, that things would go back to the way they were. But deep down, I knew the truth. The man I had married was gone, and the family I had married into saw me as nothing more than a burden. Days blurred into weeks, and the weight of their cruelty suffocated me. But as I lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, I made a silent vow to myself. I wouldn't let them break me. Little did I know, the turning point in my life was just around the corner. As the weeks turned into months, I fell into a routine that drained me, physically and emotionally. My days were consumed by endless demands, each one more degrading than the last. It wasn't just the housework. My in-laws found joy in reminding me of my place in the family. "You're lucky Ravi married you," his mother would sneer as I set the table. "What do you even bring to this family? You're worthless without him." I wanted to fight back, to shout that I wasn't worthless, but I was too exhausted. They had taken everything from me: my confidence, my sense of home, my self-worth. One evening, while I folded laundry in the corner of the living room, my father-in-law walked in, speaking on the phone. His voice was unusually enthusiastic. "Of course, we'd be honored to have you for dinner, sir," he said, bowing slightly, as if the person on the other end could see him. "It's the least we can do to show our gratitude for everything you've done for the company." When he hung up, he turned to me with a sharp glare. "Dinner needs to be perfect tomorrow. My boss is coming over, and if you embarrass me, you'll regret it." I nodded silently, suppressing the urge to snap back. The next day was a blur of preparations. I woke before dawn, scrubbing every corner of the house, shopping for the finest ingredients, and cooking a lavish feast. My hands ached, my back screamed in protest, but I didn't stop. Not because I cared about impressing my father-in-law's boss, but because I needed to prove to myself that I was capable of more than they gave me credit for. By the time the doorbell rang that evening, I was exhausted but proud of the spread I had prepared. My in-laws had dressed up as if they were hosting royalty. "Just bring the food out when we call for it," my mother-in-law hissed, shooing me away. I stood in the kitchen, my heart pounding, as I heard the door open. My father-in-law's booming voice filled the air as he greeted his boss, an imposing man in a perfectly tailored suit, but as his eyes scanned the room, they froze when they landed on me. For a moment, I thought I was imagining it, but then he spoke, his voice filled with disbelief. "Sana, is that you?" My breath caught in my throat. How did he know my name? Before I could speak, my father-in-law nervously interjected. "Oh, don't mind her, sir, she's just the help." The man's eyes narrowed, and he turned to my father-in-law, his voice cold and commanding. "The help?" he repeated, his tone sending chills through the room. "Do you have any idea who she is?" I felt the blood drain from my face. Who I was? What was he talking about? My father-in-law stammered, clearly caught off guard. I don't understand, sir, she's my daughter-in-law." But the man interrupted, his gaze never leaving me. "It's me, don't you recognize me?" I stood there frozen, staring at him, my mind in a whirlwind. He seemed so familiar, yet I couldn't quite place him. Then, like a flood, memories began rushing back to me. "Mr. Sharma?" I murmured, my voice barely above a whisper. He smiled, his eyes warming with a kindness I hadn't seen in years. "Yes, I worked closely with your father for many years. He was my best friend." The room seemed to tilt as the weight of his words hit me. This man, this commanding figure, was my late father's closest friend, and now, he was my father-in-law's superior. The air grew thick with tension. My in-laws exchanged uneasy glances, clearly stunned by the revelation. I, too, was grappling with the shock. My father's best friend? Why had my father never spoken of him? And if they were so close, why had he disappeared from our lives? Before I could ask, Mr. Sharma turned to my father-in-law, his tone harsh and unforgiving. "You've been treating her like a servant," he said, his voice dripping with anger. My father-in-law stumbled. No, sir, that's not it. She helps around the house." "Helps around the house?" Mr. Sharma interrupted, his voice rising. "I saw how you kept her hidden away in the kitchen. Don't lie to me." His eyes softened as he turned back to me. "Sa, you don't belong here. Come with me." The words hit me like a lifeline. For the first time in so long, someone was standing up for me, recognizing my worth. But before I could respond, my mother-in-law stepped in. "She's our daughter-in-law," she snapped, her voice a mixture of anger and fear. "She belongs here with her husband." Mr. Sharma raised an eyebrow. "And where is her husband? Why isn't he here to support her?" The question sliced through the room like a blade. Ravi wasn't here. He had never been there. My in-laws had no answer. Their silence spoke volumes. Finally, I found my voice. I appreciate your concern, Mr. Sharma," I said, trying to steady my trembling hands, "but I can't just leave." His expression darkened. "You don't have to live like this, Sa. Your father would never have wanted this for you." His words struck deep, pulling at the heartstrings of my memories. What would my father think if he saw me like this? But the chains of responsibility were too tight. I couldn't just walk away. Not yet. "Thank you," I whispered, "but I need time." Mr. Sharma didn't argue, though the determination in his eyes told me he wouldn't give up on me. He stayed for dinner, though the atmosphere was thick with tension. My in-laws doted on him, trying to regain his favor, but he remained distant, his focus mostly on me. As he left, he handed me a business card. "If you ever need anything at all, call me," he said firmly. I nodded, slipping the card into my pocket. The following days were unbearable. My in-laws seethed with anger at me, blaming me for embarrassing them in front of Mr. Sharma. Their mistreatment escalated, piling more work onto me, berating me at every turn. But something inside me had shifted. Mr. Sharma's words kept echoing in my mind, kindling a spark of hope I hadn't felt in years. I began to imagine a life outside this suffocating home, a life free from their control. One evening, while tidying my husband's study, I stumbled upon a stack of unpaid bills hidden in his desk drawer. My heart sank as I realized the extent of our financial troubles. No wonder my in-laws clung to Mr. Sharma, they were drowning in debt. That night, as I lay awake, a decision formed in my mind. I wasn't going to let this be my life. I didn't know how yet, but I was going to find a way out. The opportunity arrived sooner than I expected. The morning sunlight poured through the windows, but the tension in the house was thick. The night before, I had overheard my father-in-law pleading on the phone with Mr. Sharma. "He's our last hope," I heard him mutter. "If he pulls his investments, we'll lose everything." They had every reason to worry. Ravi had racked up massive debts, much of it from failed businesses he had kept secret. Now, Mr. Sharma, the one person who could help them, was firmly on my side. That realization gave me strength. I wasn't some powerless woman trapped in their web. I had a voice, and I was ready to use it. The next day, Mr. Sharma called me. "I've been thinking about what you said, Sa," he began. "I won't pressure you to leave your in-laws, but I want you to work for me. You're brilliant and capable, don't let them convince you otherwise." His words lit a fire inside me, but the idea of working outside the house terrified me. My in-laws had always discouraged me, telling me I wasn't smart enough or qualified enough. "I don't know," I murmured. "You don't need to decide now," he said gently, "but remember, this is your life, you deserve to live it on your own terms." That evening, I finally confronted my in-laws. I walked into the living room, clutching Mr. Sharma's business card. My hands were shaking, but my voice was steady. "I've decided to take Mr. Sharma's offer," I announced. My mother-in-law's face turned crimson with fury. "You will do no such thing," she spat. "What will people say if our daughter-in-law works like a common woman?" I met her glare without flinching. "What people think doesn't matter to me anymore." My father-in-law switched tactics, trying to manipulate me. "Sa, think about the family. If you leave, how will we survive? Maybe you should have thought about that before treating me like a servant," I snapped, my voice rising. Their protests continued, but I didn't back down. For the first time in years, I felt a surge of confidence. I wasn't going to let their fear and control dictate my life. The next morning, I packed my belongings. My in-laws hurled insults at me as I left, but I didn't care. For the first time since my parents' death, I felt free. Mr. Sharma met me outside his office. He had arranged everything, a place for me to stay, a job suited to my skills, and even a plan to help me rebuild my lost confidence. "You're going to do great things, Sa," he said with a warm smile. In the following weeks, my life began to change. I threw myself into my work, discovering abilities I never knew I had. Mr. Sharma became not just a mentor but a father figure, reminding me of the love and support my own father had given me. As for my in-laws, their world started to unravel. Without my unpaid labor, their household fell apart, and when Ravi returned, expecting things to go back to normal, he found a different woman. "You're too late," I told him, my voice calm. "I'm not the same person you left behind." His pleas fell on deaf ears. For the first time, I wasn't looking back. 6 months later, I stood on the balcony of my new apartment, gazing out at the city lights. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. For the first time in years, I felt hopeful about the future. Mr. Sharma's words echoed in my mind. "This is your life, you deserve to live it on your own terms." And that's exactly what I was going to do.